a leather jacket does something strange to an outfit. You can wear the plainest shirt, the most normal jeans, the most harmless shoes, and the second that jacket goes on, the whole message changes. Suddenly, you look a little harder to impress, a little harder to push around. Even if you are just walking to the store for milk, the jacket acts like you might have a motorcycle parked outside. That is the funny thing about leather jackets. Today, they feel like rebellion you can zip up. They show up in movies, rock concerts, fashion shoots, biker bars, thrift stores, and expensive boutiques. They can look dangerous, stylish, messy, polished, or all of that at once. But the leather jacket did not begin as a costume for looking cool. It began as protection. Long before leather became a style statement, humans used animal hides because they worked. Leather could block wind. It could handle scraping. It could last longer than ordinary woven cloth. It was not soft luxury at first. It was tough material for tough conditions. That matters because the modern leather jacket was born around machines that made the human body vulnerable in new ways. Cars, motorcycles, airplanes. Fast engines created fast wind, flying dirt, freezing air, oil, rain, and crashes that could tear through lighter clothing. A wool coat might keep you warm on a sidewalk. It was less helpful when you were riding through cold air with no real shield around you. Early riders and drivers needed something closer to wearable armor, and leather was already waiting for the job. If you have ever owned a leather jacket, or even tried one on in a store mirror, you probably know the feeling. It is not just clothing. It changes your posture a little. It makes you stand differently. That attitude came later, but the toughness was there from the beginning. If your closet has more strange history hiding in it than it admits, subscribe for more weird clothing history. Because before the leather jacket belonged to rebels, movie stars, and musicians, it belonged to people facing speed, weather, and real danger head-on. The first leather jackets that looked even a little like modern ones were not made for posing. They were made for people sitting on loud, dirty machines with almost nothing between their bodies and the outside world. Early motorists had a problem that sounds strange now. Driving was not always comfortable. A car could be open to the air, rough on the road, and messy to operate. Dust kicked up from unpaved streets. Rain came straight at you. Oil and grease were part of the experience. Clothing had to take abuse. Motorcyclists had it even worse. A motorcycle gave you speed, but it also gave you wind straight into your chest. At low speeds, that was annoying. At higher speeds, it became exhausting and cold. If you fell, ordinary fabric could rip almost instantly against the road. Leather was not magic, but it gave riders a better chance than thin cloth. That is why leather made sense. It was skin turned into a second skin. Thick enough to resist scraping, dense enough to block wind, flexible enough to move with the body. For people riding fast machines, that mix was valuable. Then, airplanes made the problem more extreme. Early pilots were not sitting inside sealed, heated cabins. Many flew in open cockpits, high above the ground, where the air could become brutally cold. Wind hit their faces and bodies for long stretches. They needed clothing that could hold warmth, block air, and survive rough use. Leather flight gear became part of that world. Jackets, helmets, gloves, and boots all helped protect pilots from conditions that ordinary clothing was never built for. And this is where the leather jacket started picking up a new meaning. A jacket made for pilots or riders was still practical, but it also told people something. The person wearing it had access to machines, speed, risk, modern technology. They were not just dressed for the weather, they were dressed for danger. That is a powerful message for a piece of clothing to carry. Once governments and militaries began standardizing jackets for men in the air, leather moved from personal protection into something bigger. It became part of a uniform, and uniforms have a way of turning useful objects into symbols. Military leather jackets gave the garment a new kind of weight. A jacket for a motorcyclist said speed. A jacket for a pilot said something even larger. It suggested nerve, training, and danger above the clouds. In the early 20th century, flying was still young enough to feel almost unreal. Pilots were not ordinary workers in ordinary clothes. They were people doing something most humans had never done, and the clothing had to match the job. Flight jackets were built for brutal conditions. High altitude could mean deep cold. Aircraft could be cramped, loud, and physically punishing. A pilot or crewman might spend hours inside a machine that shook, roared, and offered very little comfort. Leather helped hold warmth in and wind out. Fur or shearling linings added insulation, which is a simple word for trapping body heat so it does not escape as quickly. That practical design became emotional. Think about what a worn flight jacket could mean. It might carry scuffs from service. It might have patches from a squadron. It might have paint, names, or symbols added by the person who wore it. It was no longer just a coat. It became a record of risk. During the World Wars, especially with bomber crews and fighter pilots, jackets became tied to a very specific image of courage. These were young men wearing heavy gear and machines that could be shot down, freeze up, catch fire, or fail far from safety. The jacket sat right at the center of that story. This is one reason leather jackets later looked so powerful on screen. They already carried the memory of people who faced danger for real. There is also a status piece here. Not everyone got to wear these jackets. Military clothing often marks belonging. It tells the world that you are part of a group, trained for a purpose, and separated from ordinary civilian life. So when leather left the cockpit, it did not leave empty. It carried speed from motorcycles, danger from early machines, and courage from the military. All it needed was a camera, a famous face, and the right kind of attitude to turn protection into performance. Hollywood understood the leather jacket almost immediately. Film is built on shortcuts. A costume has to tell the audience who someone is before that person explains themselves. A suit can say power. A uniform can say authority. A leather jacket can say trouble before the character even opens their mouth. That made it perfect for movie rebels. By the middle of the 20th century, the leather jacket was no longer only tied to pilots, soldiers, and writers. It was becoming a visual signal. When actors wore it on screen, especially in motorcycle and youth rebellion films, the jacket carried a message that was easy to read. This person does not fit neatly into polite society. The jacket looked sharp, but not delicate. It looked expensive in one setting and rough in another. It suggested movement, engines, night streets, bad decisions. It made a character feel like they had a life outside the rules of the room. That is powerful costume design. Marlon Brando helped cement this image in The Wild One in 1953. His black motorcycle jacket did not look like formal menswear. It looked heavy, closed off, and confrontational. The tilted cap helped, but the jacket did a lot of the work. It made rebellion visible. Then James Dean pushed the broader youth image even further, even when he was not always in leather. The important thing was the mood. Young men dressed in ways that worried adults. Clothing became a quick way to show generational tension. A jacket could make someone look restless, angry, or unwilling to behave. And once that image existed, real people could borrow it. Young viewers did not need to be pilots. They did not need to be war heroes. They did not even need to own motorcycles. The jacket let them wear a piece of danger without necessarily living the full danger behind it. That is where fashion becomes strange. A practical object turns into a symbol, then the symbol becomes something people use to build identity. The leather jacket had moved from the cockpit to the cinema screen, but the screen was only the middle stop. Out on real roads, in clubs, garages, and music scenes, people were about to make it louder, rougher, and much harder for adults to ignore. Bikers gave the leather jacket a life that Hollywood could only imitate. For motorcycle riders, leather still had a real job. It protected the body from wind, weather, and the road. But biker culture also turned the jacket into a public signal. A black leather jacket could show belonging. It could show distance from normal office life, school rules, and quiet respectability. This was clothing with a border around it. If you were inside that world, the jacket could mean loyalty, skill, and shared risk. If you were outside it, the same jacket might look threatening. That double meaning made it even stronger. It was practical gear for one group and a warning sign to everyone else. Then music made the jacket louder. Rock and roll picked up the leather jacket because it already had the right energy. It looked tough under stage lights. It moved well. It did not look like something approved by parents, teachers, or polite society. That mattered. Youth culture often needs symbols, and the leather jacket was almost too perfect. Punk pushed it further. A punk leather jacket was not meant to look clean and respectable. It could be covered in studs, patches, paint, slogans, band names, and scratches. The damage was part of the point. Instead of hiding wear, people showed it off. The jacket became a surface for anger, humor, politics, and identity. That changed the meaning again. A military jacket might say you belong to an official unit. A punk jacket might say you belong to a group that rejects the official version of almost everything. Same basic material, very different message. And because leather ages visibly, every jacket could start to look personal. Creases formed at the elbows, scuffs appeared at the edges, the black faded in places. A worn leather jacket could look like it had survived things, even when some of those things were just late buses, loud shows, and bad weather. What clothing today does that same job? What item tells people something about you before you say a word? The irony is that once rebellion becomes this recognizable, stores notice, brands notice, fashion notices, and the jacket that once made people nervous starts appearing in shop windows with very polished lighting. That is the strange final turn of the leather jacket. The garment that once suggested danger became something you could buy in a mall. Luxury designers made sleek versions. Fast fashion made cheaper versions. Vintage stores sold worn ones with history already built into the creases. Faux leather and vegan leather gave people similar looks without using animal hide, though the feel and durability can vary a lot depending on the material. The jacket became flexible. It could still look rebellious, but it could also look polished. A black biker jacket over a dress sent one message. A brown bomber jacket with jeans sent another. A cropped leather jacket on a runway was different from a patched one at a punk show, but they were all borrowing from the same long memory. That memory is why the leather jacket still works. When someone wears one today, they are not only wearing a coat, they are wearing traces of early pilots freezing in open air, riders leaning into wind, military crews carrying fear and pride on their backs, movie rebels staring down adults, bikers marking belonging, musicians turning volume into style, punks writing their anger directly onto their clothes. Most people do not think through all of that when they put one on. They just feel the effect. The shoulders seem stronger. The outfit looks less innocent. The mirror gives back a version of the person that seems a little more ready for trouble, even if the biggest danger that day is spilling coffee in public. That is how clothing works at its best and strangest. It carries old meanings into ordinary moments. It lets people borrow a feeling from history without needing to live the original danger. The leather jacket began as protection from cold, wind, machines, and impact. Over time, it became protection of another kind, a way to look tougher, freer, louder, or less easy to control. So the next time you see one, do not just see fashion, see armor that learned how to act rebellious. And if you want more weird clothing history, subscribe, and tell me which item should get pulled out of the closet next.